Hi, everyone. This is Gary Berman, host of the Cyber Hero Adventure Show. We have an incredibly special topic today that's important to all of us as American citizens and everywhere really around the world. We're going to be talking with three incredible subject matter experts on the notion of national security and cybersecurity. And then we're going to drill down a little further into critical infrastructure. CISA's 16 critical infrastructure sectors are vulnerable, it turns out, and are to varying degrees under attack, as we speak. Then we're going to drill down a little bit further into some of the vulnerabilities in supply chains, which we all know is something that we've got to be incredibly cognizant of and aware of. And last but not least, we're going to talk about how we fund all of this work that we're doing, private and public sector and things like that. So without further ado, let me introduce some great panelists. Let me begin with Sam Visner. Sam, in addition to being a mentor of mine, has a storied body of experience in national security. And he's also, or was until recently, a professor at Georgetown University and many other things. So Sam, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Gary. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you and with my distinguished colleagues, Ron and Sasha.
Indeed. And so Ron Gula is the founder of Gula Tech Adventures, and he's been a long-time proponent of cybersecurity, a thought leader for sure. In addition to being very involved in private equity of cybersecurity firms, he's also done some amazing work in the philanthropic area and was the CEO of Tenable and many other things. And so, Ron, what a privilege to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Looking forward to it.
And last but not least, Sasa Zdjelar. Sasha is the Chief Trust Officer of Reversing Labs, and also has other responsibilities that he's very involved with, and has been a CISO at ExxonMobil and done stuff with Salesforce, and like both Sam and Ron are the pinnacle of our industry. So what a privilege, to have you with us today, Sasha.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Indeed. So just jumping right into this notion of national security, my goodness, there's so much going on. And one of the things I think that our audience would be very keen to hear on, beginning with you, Sam, is your assessment of the geopolitical implications in national security and cybersecurity at the moment.
Sure. Well, thanks, Gary. It's a big question. I'll try not to give too big an answer. The current geopolitical situation with which we're faced is more complex and more challenging than it's been in several decades. We have one country, Russia, which is highly opportunistic, which is seeking to disrupt the international order and recast the Eurasian continent with itself as a dominant power. We have another country, China, which is trying to influence and reshape the international system to suit its own interests. And then we have other countries, Iran, North Korea, which have developed asymmetrically powerful tools, cyber tools, and other tools that can affect regionally the outcomes of situations in which they have a strong interest. And this has created a very turbulent world. Cyberspace has emerged as a domain of its own, and one that is connected with every other domain, land, space, land, sea, air, space, such that what happens in cyberspace has become a question of governance. It's become a question of sovereignty. Countries are seizing the cyberspace on which they depend. They are invading the cyberspace on which other countries depend. And countries now understand that the ability to defend the cyberspace on which you depend and to defend the cyberspace on which your critical infrastructures depend, and to defend the cyberspace in which your critical infrastructures and your business infrastructures reside, not just depend, but in which they reside, That is a question of national security. So the term national security has been broadened to include the security of your business infrastructure, of your critical infrastructure, of your ability to undertake your global commitments, and of your ability to play your role in the case of the United States, a very powerful and influential and positive role in the international system. Having said that, attacks on cyberspace, attacks that place our cybersecurity at risk, imperil all aspects of our national security. And since cybersecurity is not just about protecting information, but it is about influencing geopolitical and economic outcomes in this cyberspace realm, our need to be able to defend this realm is more important than ever. And as more and more of our critical and business infrastructures reside in this realm, we have to understand that it places them at risk, and we have a special challenge in defending them.
Indeed. And Ron, I was looking at some of your background, and you had made an investment in a unidirectional device for operational technology, as a way to protect critical infrastructure. Maybe you can share with our audience what that is, how it works, to whatever degree you're comfortable sharing.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I think Sam's comments are spot on. And we did make an investment in a company called Fend. And for folks who are sort of armchair kind of looking at cyber, basically the way I describe it is this: is when I was at the NSA, I had unclassified computers, classified computers, and those classified computers were only connected to classified computers, and everybody on those things had a clearance. In civilian world, we really don't have that. We have cybersecurity where we just try to connect everything to everything and secure it with access controls and firewalls. And, from a nation state point of view, that doesn't really do a whole lot to slow somebody down. So if you want to do something like get temperatures out of a nuclear silo, get temperatures and water flow out of things like, water treatment plants and stuff like that, but you don't want to do it with a computer, you can do it with a one-way data diode. And this is something that's a pretty simple thing. I should have had one here with it. I could have showed you, but literally protocols go in one way and they don't go back the other way. You don't create an attack path for like kind of what happened to Target, where, hackers went through their HVAC system to get their corporate network. So people want to check out Fen, check it out. But the big message there is people really need to think about segmenting their data. Cybersecurity works, but it only works enough. Segmenting your data and figure out what's important is much more long-term viable for people.
Indeed. And just to build on Sam's point on national security, what's your current assessment of America's posture, realizing that's an incredibly complex question, but how would you kind of characterize how we're doing in terms of cybersecurity and critical infrastructure?
Two things. It's the best it's ever been, but we still have a long way to go. We've actually got the national cybersecurity strategy. We've got a lot of things. There's a lot of criticism to that, but the government's doing the role the government's supposed to do. The real problem is that we're a free and open society, and because of that, we have. I'm not advocating for not having that, right? But because of that, we've got different agencies that do different things, and I talk about this like the Justice League. Everybody look at Cyber Command, CIA, NSA, FBI, DHS, DOJ. They all have different powers. And, if you want to stop like a Russian APT inside the United States, well, until it's detected, no crime's been committed. So whose job is to prevent that, right? Are we supposed to be relying on the NSA and the CIA to disrupt that Cyber Command, overseas? It's a hard thing to do. So people really don't have this concept of a cyber fire department, right? There's no local place to call because of how we've set up society. And because of that, we still have a long way to go as a collective.
Indeed.
Just on that topic, there's been some interesting conversation recently among, a number of kind of CISO circles or that, is there ever going to be a point where we have some sort of collective societal or even federal responsibility for large cybersecurity breaches? And it was interesting how they likened it. They kind of likened it to FEMA. They said, if there's kind of a natural disaster that the local municipality or local region had no real or realistic chance of kind of withstanding, right? A Cat 5 hurricane rolled through or whatever. There is this organization that acts as kind of a backstop
for, disaster, funds release, bringing in people from other regions to assist. And so there was this interesting conversation about, will there be a time where maybe we stand up kind of the equivalent of FEMA for cyber, where there is some sort of a giant outsized, like no one could have possibly, withstood something like that attack against either an industry or a sector or something like that. Could there be an organization set up that has that sort of response? Where you have some federal, both dollars, resources, and other things allocated to help act as kind of a backstop in that situation.
I think that's really
just to build. Sorry, one quick point, Ryan. Sorry, but just to build on that point, Sasha. One of the things that seems to be the case is the criminals, whether they be nation-state hackers or criminals, are horizontally structured. They seem to share threats, and everything freely because they're not encumbered like the defenders are, who are, I think, more vertically structured, because of intellectual property or competition or the patchwork of state, local, federal, and global regulations and things like that. How do we get through that to be able to accomplish as Ron said, the equivalence of the Justice League? Or that would be for anyone,
Well, just one quick comment on that. So you mentioned something that I always found fascinating is, you mentioned how they've become kind of specialized and there's markets for, well, I'll sell you my foothold into the environment. Well, I'll sell you my persistence module. What's really fascinating is, all these people are becoming amazing IT people. Like they're able to patch their malware and rootkits better than we can apparently patch our own, good systems. It's amazing how professionalized this, industry has become on kind of the bad guy side. They have specialized firms. They have companies that, are unbelievably good at patching their software. It's just amazing how professional this has gotten over the last decade or so.
Yeah, sorry, Ron.
There are some things that we could do perhaps a little better. For example, we've identified 16 critical infrastructure sectors, and I don't think it's any secret that in my role as chair of the board of directors of the Space ISAC, I've been supporting the idea that space systems should be declared a critical infrastructure sector. But every such sector has a sector risk management agency, and every one of these sectors has its own information sharing and analysis center. Raising the water level so that they're all as effective as possible. Right now, I would say that there is a variety of models. Some sectors get more support than others. Other sectors like water are frankly, we've only in recent years realized how vulnerable we believe our water systems are and started to pay more attention to it. And water systems are not getting a fraction perhaps of the resources they need from a sector risk management approach. So doing a real risk assessment of every sector and then addressing the resources, the organization, the capabilities necessary to secure that sector based on that risk assessment, as opposed to, well, this is a bigger agency, so it gets more money. This is a bigger sector. Water may be a smaller sector or it may be a larger sector, but everybody drinks water. So the dependence that we have on our water system is enormous. It's taken a long time for us to recognize those vulnerabilities, and it took a hack a couple of years ago for us to really start to focus on it. So taking a look at every one of the critical infrastructure sectors, looking carefully at the risks associated with those sectors, the probability of that risk, the impact associated with that probability and risk, and the abilities of the sector risk management agencies and the ISACs to begin to mitigate those risks and to improve response and recovery, I think would be a good place to start. And it would be a good place to start because it would be starting with something we already have and that we know can already be made to work.
Ron, you want to jump in?
So I'm all for, more coordination and, more studies and stuff, but there's been a lot of studies in the past, and they always find a scapegoat and, recommendations and things like that. And I think what fails is that cyber people tend to live within a bubble. And I would question if even people in cyber can name all the ISACs, for the critical infrastructures out there and things like that. Even there's a lot of hard work that's out there. So my approach here is when I see stuff like, TSA, they just had a SQL injection where people could have bypassed the line and gotten into the cockpit with some flight planning software. And it's really easy to point fingers and say, oh, they shouldn't do that, or should have been penalties, and that sort of thing. But of course, we can't blame the victim. We can't blame people who make mistakes, but we really don't have a way to measure that. So I like to push this concept to the general public called data care, which basically says you need to think about what you're doing. It's as important as healthcare. And when you do look at the world like that, we try to, as a cyber kind of industry, we tell people that you're not responsible for the decisions you make. Like if you get hacked and you do things, it's okay, someone's going to bail you out. But the reality is people do have a role in the decisions of where their data goes and what they're protecting. And from the board level to the church level, whatever, the people have to have a say in what they're doing. And until we get this at the population, we're always going to be chasing these big strategic issues. The average person doesn't really know where their data is or how to protect it or what they should do in the face of these big breaches.
So we're gonna build on that in a few moments about different modalities on how to distill the complexity of this conversation into something that average people can get their heads around. We'll come back to that in a few minutes. So one of the things that I learned, Sam, based on your analysis of the ISACs and the role of government is I had the privilege to be at the release of the President's Commission on PCAST. I'm not sure exactly what it stands for, but report to the White House on critical infrastructure. And in attendance at this rather small gathering, where each of the government representatives of the critical infrastructure sectors, so the person who does water, energy, financial services, telecommunications, and so on, were actually present there. And I had the opportunity to just do a few interviews and listen and learn. And basically, the consensus is that people are motivated. They want to do a good job at this. However, to varying degrees, they are really not adequately funded, nowhere close to being adequately funded. And one example happens to be water. Another sector that seems to be doing really well is financial services, but that might be because of the requirements, the regulatory requirements and things like that. So how do we, I'll throw this out to all of you, how do we allocate money the right way?
Well, look, let me return to a comment that I made earlier. First, I think is we have to do a rational risk assessment. What would be the effect on on our way of life, on our national security, on our economy, if any one of these sectors are affected? And start to think about what it would take to close the gap between the capability we have and the capability we need. In other words, do a gap and capabilities based assessment. Right now, resources, frankly, are allocated on the basis of good old-fashioned Washington bureaucratic competition and infighting, and it's certainly a game with which I'm certainly familiar, right? Having been a government senior executive. But the truth of the matter is that the national security of the United States is too important to be left entirely to that game. So we need to find out, what do we need? What do we have? What's the gap? And what is it going to take to close it, and start to allocate resources that way? We have the capacity to do that kind of an analysis. The Government Accountability Office, GAO, which advises Congress, is a really good place to start. The Congressional Research Service, which is a component of the Library of Congress, they can help do this work. They can help advise Congress and advise the executive branch regarding where the gaps are and what needs to be done. In the meantime, of course, I'm going to be persistent in pressing for the designation of space systems as a critical infrastructure sector. The private sector and the ISAC and its partners are doing all they can without that designation, but that designation certainly would be helpful. That is certainly one of the things that we can do. And I'm going to make one other comment, and that is, I think literacy is important. This country needs more scientific and technical literacy. People need, at the individual level, more economic literacy to be able to afford what they buy and to buy homes that they can afford. But we also need more literacy, not only for individuals, but at the corporate level and the board level. What are the risks your enterprise is facing? What is the probability of that risk? What is the expected value of that risk being materialized? What resources do you have? What resources do you need? How are you going to close that gap? Elevating this to a corporate level approach is going to be important. And Gary, not everybody is going to say this, but I will. Frankly, cybersecurity is still a fairly cost-sensitive market. People are still looking for relatively inexpensive ways to mitigate their risk and ensure their way out of the rest of it. I think that that is a short-sighted approach, but it's an approach with which we're living right now. We've got to overcome it if we're going to do a better job of securing our infrastructures.
You know, you reminded me of a conversation I had recently where this gentleman said, you know, when it comes to visibility, China knows more about what we have than we do. And when he said that, well, what do you think? Is that valid? You know, Ron, what's your assessment, Sasha?
Well, can I answer that first, just for a second? Having dealt with having to clean up from some advanced persistent threats, one thing I tell you is that companies, particularly those that buy other companies and then assume other companies' IT infrastructures and the risks associated with them, don't always know what they're getting. But a good cyber adversary, a good foreign intelligence service will do good reconnaissance and have exquisite intelligence. They will case your house and know what junk you've got hiding in the basement better than you do. And that's one of the things that happens with a professional intelligence service. When a professional intelligence service surveys a target with the discipline of an intelligence service, they're likely to know as much, if not far more, about the target than the target knows of themselves. So I think it's a very reasonable concern.
You know, hey, Sasha, let me just drill down further into Ron. Did I interrupt you again? So sorry. Were you going to
No, it's all
something?
good. I wanted to pile on what Sam was saying, and you know, when somebody just says China this or China that, like obviously there's a Chinese threat, but the vast majority of the Chinese population is not against, you know, the U.S. It's the various
Right.
intelligence agencies and whatnot, and the difference between hacking and intelligence is absolutely spot on. And people who've been a victim of IP theft might come from an employee. You know, there might not be any hacking involved. It's still going to be part of a grand, you know, conspiracy and that sort of thing. So yeah, I just wanted to pile on, Sam.
And
Yeah, I
Sasha,
think a
you know,
space that doesn't get enough along these same lines, a space that maybe doesn't get enough attention, or maybe it's just starting to, is the concept of resilience. So here we're talking about what an adversary has to do, right, to disrupt massively. And, you know, we just had a very, very large, you know, event happen in the world where I would say plenty of people would say they got disrupted, and had nothing to do with, you know, a breach. It was, you know, a vendor that a lot of people rely on, you know, had kind of an internal patching or testing kind of challenge. And I think what it highlighted for a lot of people around the world is, you know, the CIA triad still has availability in it, but it's probably kind of the least neglected in the InfoSec focus areas. And look how impacted everyone was. And it was simply because of how many entities relied on a single vendor, you know, to do everything correctly. And so what I've been, you know, talking a lot to even some of our portfolio companies and, you know, anyone who I kind of, you know, work with or advise is, how do you think about resilience for your company? Meaning, just how would you survive, not thrive, just survive a company if all you had was 3-4 days, you know, of manual processing and operating without kind of IT systems? And most companies are brittle to the point where they could only survive for 3, maybe 4 days before vendor master sheets and orders in flight and whatever all fall apart, and you can no longer meet your obligations to creditors, debtors, society, you know, employees, and everyone else, regulators. And so it brings up this interesting concept of availability and overall resilience. How do people think about their software supply chains? And not just from a pure security perspective. There absolutely is a massive cybersecurity angle that we should probably chat about as well relative to software supply chain. But just from an availability perspective, have people considered that today is probably the least brittle and least reliant they're going to be on third parties? With every passing day, what you might be operating yourself on-prem is probably about to be end of life and is probably about to be replaced with something SaaS out there, where you're once again kind of farming out how you run your shop to how someone else runs their shop. And so, this concept of what would you do to quickly pivot to something else, I think most companies have kind of not thought about thoroughly enough.
Well, you said something else that relates to something that you should add to right now, which is if I'm not mistaken, you have a new book, Supply Chain for Security for Dummies. Is that the right title?
Probably. We probably do, yeah.
But I mean, this whole notion of not dummies, but being able to communicate, in maybe a new way. Ron, maybe you can talk a little bit about the animation you've done in the Defense League and things like that.
Oh, I appreciate that. It's funny. I think like a lot of people in cyber, we want to communicate to the general public. And like a lot of people, I had a podcast and I started with interviews and I moved over to kind of talking on various topics. I try not to do news, but try to do strategic topics. And I really got involved with animation. One of the topics that got me into animation was China was doing a lot of router hacking. This administration just came out with a way to secure BGP and routes and stuff like that. It's good. That's the kind of stuff that we should be talking about. But just to say that the route was hacked, a router was hacked, that's not enough. I had to show people that, look, if you're an incident responder, the IOCs you might be looking for inside the network might not be there because China might have hacked the router on the outside and changed them on the way out using something called network address translation. Saying it and showing it in a video are like two different things. And what happened was I started getting into more, not just cyber stuff, but talking about tech startup things like how do you raise money? How do you name your company? Simple things like org charts and stuff. Well, I started doing animations for stuff like that. And the animations with modern technology where you can use, I'm not talking about just going to an AI and prompting, saying, I want to see, like literally putting some work into like what you want to think and see in the scene. And we've all seen movies and stuff. And I'm like, I can take that image and put it in there. Well, anyway, so Gula Tech Adventures, I got this YouTube channel, pretty popular, has a whole bunch of stuff. The one we just did on critical infrastructure, I kind of went straight to the heart, and I have a superhero called Critical Infrastructure who's fighting an adversary called Blackout. I was very tempted to call it, China threat or Russian threat or something. I kind of kept it a little less geopolitical. And they do a fight, and it's interesting. I've got a lot of feedback, from that kind of stuff. So, folks want to see it, check it out on YouTube. I put some things on Twitter, and it's fun stuff.
We'll make sure to put a link into this show so that people can access it. So, Sam, let's continue on national security in the form of election security. There's quite a lot going on about that now. Justice Department has indicted people for misinformation, disinformation, things like that. What's your assessment as to the integrity of the 2024 elections?
It goes to my definition of cybersecurity, which is not just about getting into an information system and hacking it. It has more to do with the security and the sanctity of the overall information environment. The systems that we use to administer elections in this country, by and large, I think are pretty secure. After all of the discussions and audits about 2020, we found very little in the systems to worry about. No system is perfect. I'm not going to pretend that any system is. But frankly, I think our systems are better than they used to be. And certainly the idea of stuffing ballot boxes is an old art form in this country, and we probably do better with our more modern systems to protect against that than we did in the past. You can vote early, but you're less likely to be able to vote often, given the situation. But that doesn't mean that we're secure, because the other component of information of cybersecurity, which I define as the ability to affect outcomes in cyberspace, that kind of cybersecurity is being imperiled through information operations on the part of adversaries and competitors who are sowing disinformation, who are engaging in what Kathleen Carley at Carnegie Mellon University calls information maneuvers, What effect do I want to have? Who are the people I need to affect to have that effect? What message do I need to give them? What network do I build and manipulate to get those people to act the way I want them to gain the outcome that I desire? That is also a kind of offensive cybersecurity operation. And from those operations, I think we are not immune. The Bureau, as I think you know, is bringing charges against a couple of Russians for essentially using disinformation, which I see as an attempt to undermine the cybersecurity of the information environment. So protecting the information environment is also important from a cybersecurity perspective. And from that perspective, I think our security needs to be better.
If I can add two things to that. So one of the guests I had on our show was Ben Idita, who runs Voting Work, which is a nonprofit voting system. If we all want to just go run an election somewhere, we could use the software to print the ballots, collect the ballots, get the votes and whatnot. So like anybody on YouTube, when I put it out, I try to advertise. Well, YouTube says, no, you spent the whole time talking about elections. You must certainly be an election video. We can't let you do this. We're gonna suppress you. So they're trying to be sensitive to those kind of information operations. The second thing is, if you look at malware, if you look at how command and control works and how botnet works and how you position the battlefield, so to speak, and you do that, it's the same thing with this misinformation, right? You don't just go and post something to Twitter, or to X. You have to do it from an account that's been there and getting by the detection to make sure it's a human and that sort of thing. So these information operations, when you really look at how they're run, they look like a traditional cyber malware data exfiltration operation, and we're getting better.
And that's what
yeah.
that's what they are. So this is a different kind of malware, but it is malware just the same.
Yeah, indeed. Well, thank you for that. Sasha, let's drill down further into this notion of supply chain cybersecurity. This is something that Reversing Labs is well known for. I had the privilege of interviewing the CEO, Mario Vuxan, about 5 or 6 years ago, and that's kind of how we got connected. So what's your assessment of supply chain vulnerabilities at the moment, and what can we do to improve our posture?
Yeah, I mean, if you look back on, it's certainly not the first one, but just to give maybe the listeners some insights into how long this has been going on. Like, I think people have generally heard of WannaCry and NotPetya, right? Kind of back in the circa 2017 days. What maybe not everyone understands is, underneath the covers, there was a Ukrainian tax software called Medox that led to this kind of auto update that backdoored something. And anyway, the part that I think matters in that conversation is, think about what that software was. It was software that whoever the customers were paid to use this, tax software, and they were customers of it. So then let's take a look at what's happened over the last 7 or 8 years. You have things like Circle CI, Kaseya, MoveIt, SolarWinds, 3CX, Avanti. There's something that all of these have in common, which is that they're all commercial applications. They're all commercial. The conversation at the moment, I think, is being kind of disproportionately dominated as somehow tying software supply chain to open source. And certainly there's massive risk in open source as well. Absolutely. But the breaches are coming through commercial tools that people are buying. And those two processes are very different in companies. How commercial off-the-shelf software comes into a company, and the procurement processes and risk assessment processes and whatever look very different than how open source components come into a company. So, your question about what is the state of it and what can we do about it, one of the things we've been advocating for is for people to look at their commercial software from a lens that's different than just questionnaires and cyber insurance and things like that. The standard of due care used to be, did you know, right? The standard of due care has shifted to, should you have known. And in the era of should you have known, relying on things like questionnaires and cyber insurance is just not enough. And many CISOs who I know are starting to look for better. They're starting to look for an actual technical control in this space. They want something that they can use and analyze whether that software has malware like you're talking about. And, one thing people don't realize, this is almost like the best kept secret in cyber, maybe it's about to not be after, this goes live, is every tool out there that does some type of antivirus scanning, does not matter which vendor. This is not calling anyone out specifically. They all have the exact same limitation. There's a file size at which they just fail open. They just fail open. They say, oh, this is larger than I can handle. I'm going to fail open. Why do they do that? They do that because they've made everyone who's a buyer, and I was a buyer for 20 years. I know exactly how this works. They made a promise to say, we're never more than 1% hit on your CPU. So they ask engineering, okay, 1% equals about how big of a file? And engineering will come back and say, oh, I don't know, maybe 70, 80 meg, maybe 100, something in that realm. And they draw the line there and they say anything larger than that, we won't even look at. What's also kind of squirrely is the conviction that you will get says no malware found, except what it doesn't say is comma, because we didn't even look. It just says no malware found. And so you have situations like SolarWinds, for example, that malware sailed right through the overwhelming majority of solutions, not because it was particularly advanced malware, it's because no one else even looked. That's one of the things that differentiates Reversing Labs and some of the solutions is any file size, any packer, any file type, any extension, generally up to tens of gigs, even above that, they can look at and find malware better than anyone else. So to me, this is the first technical control that CISOs have had to be able to look at commercial software and open source. I'm not at all devaluing the importance of also looking at open source, but the ability to take a look at, what are we on right now? We're on Zoom. If you're a customer of Zoom, which many, many people around the world are, what do you get from Zoom? You get zoom.exe, okay? Do you know what's in it? Do you know what's in that commercial binary? How can you find out? Can you generate a bill of materials for something that a vendor provided you? If they're not willing to generate an SBOM and provide it for you, can you generate one of your own? Can you look at the one you generated and compare to the one they gave you and see if they match? These are capabilities that start looking like an actual control. No one else can do this. Reversing Labs can. We can take a commercial binary that you get from a vendor and generate the SBOM for you. You don't have to ask them for one. We can generate it. Or if they give you one, use it to compare. See if they're telling the truth. See if what they say is in it is actually what's in it. Now that starts resembling a technical control. And we think that's the direction that this conversation needs to go in to secure the national and global software supply chain.
Well, there's also another thing you're saying that's incredibly important is the human element in the role of a CISO. It's changing pretty fast. Some of it is, for example, not wanting to go to jail, SEC compliance and things like that. And for the first time that I've been in this industry, I'm seeing a confluence of factors. The overall macroeconomic conditions in the technology ecosystem, and then the first ever sort of layoffs of CISOs and working anywhere, and this notion of fractionalization of their time and talent. And one of the things that we're doing at the Cyber Hero Network is we're working on a platform to empower talent, CISOs, to be able to offer their knowledge at scale through co-pilots and avatars representing them to small to medium businesses, so that we can assess their security posture, improve them somewhat over time, and to do that, at scale. What is your assessment, Sam, of the level of talent right now and the pressures that CISOs are under? Is what I'm saying valid to you?
Yeah, I want to, before I answer that question, I want to go back and footstop something our friend Sasha said. It's not just, what did you know, but what should you have known? Some of us have argued that the time has come. In fact, it came a long time ago for us to have a sort of Sarbanes-Oxley approach to the cybersecurity of enterprises, which is to say, it's one thing for you to say you didn't know or you might have known, but did you in fact have controls in place so that you would have known? And if not, saying that you didn't know about it is not adequate if in fact you never put in place the mechanisms that made it possible. Sarbanes-Oxley requires key executives in an organization to be able to prove that they had controls in place so that if wrongdoing or something else occurred, they would find out about it and be able to take steps. And we need that kind of a requirement for cybersecurity. I think it's overdue. in terms of whether or not we have the right expertise, I want to go back to something Ron said, because I think we have cybersecurity people who are living in a bubble. They think that cybersecurity is about just the practice of protecting information and information systems. It is about understanding information systems. Cybersecurity people should not wait until AI is, quote, perfected before they decide to secure it. They should be part of the development cycle. Cybersecurity people should be first and foremost experts in the information systems they are trying to safeguard. If it's election systems, they should be experts in the information ecosystem. If they are cybersecurity people working to secure cloud infrastructure, they should be part of the design team. In other words, they should be information technology experts. And I think if there is a gap in the skill set that cybersecurity people have, and I don't have empirical data, Gary, this is my opinion. It's not a theory, it's barely even a hypothesis. But my opinion is that we have cybersecurity people who actually are not experts in the information systems and information infrastructures and ecosystems they're trying to safeguard. So these people need more formal training and education in basic information technology and computer science if they're going to be effective in safeguarding these systems. And I think that's a real gap. They need more science in addition to their technology.
Yeah, can I just comment on something you said? You mentioned Sarbanes-Oxley. Maybe 6 months ago, I started engaging a lot of different CISO communities in this concept of, is the CISO becoming kind of the new cyber CFO? And, in light of the SEC Wells notice and kind of the moving goalposts on expectations, are we about to see necessarily a Sarbanes-Oxley-like set of expectations emerge for CISOs? And I think that's very likely. Just if I put on my Nostradamus hat, I think something analogous to Sarbanes-Oxley for cyber is coming sooner versus later.
But not just
Well, I
CISOs,
mean,
it has to be the key executives to whom they report. They have to be accountable for knowing these things. The CISO can advise them, but the CISO doesn't run the company. Somebody who runs the company has to be responsible, and that's what Sarbanes-Oxley did in the finance world.
Yep.
But even on a more elementary level, if Gary Berman, if I tell someone that, I'm a CISO and they believe me, then that's it. There are actually, there's no CPA kind of certification or the law, the bar exam. There are many certifications, as we all know, but that just seems like not a good system or an incomplete system, for vetting someone. When maybe the actual way to think about it is what problems can you actually solve, which is kind of what Sam was alluding to. Ron, what do you think about that?
Well, this all comes down to the professionalization of the cybersecurity industry, and I'll go back to my data care comments. So, I'd be happy to get certifications, but one of the videos I did on this was it's an airline, and there's a airline stewardess in the front. And you hear the emergency thing, and she says, "Excuse me, is there anybody who's a cybersecurity expert, on the plane?" Of course, it's supposed to be like a doctor or something like that. But that's the point. It's like cyber is still not at that level that people understand, even though people experience data loss every day, when they get ransomware or their data stolen and that kind of thing. So I'm all for professionalized things. I'm all for raising the controls in public companies. But we have this story of like the haves and the have-nots in cyber. On one hand, you have these public companies where, yes, the CISO role is going to change. It's going to have more controls, more power, probably even a better way to like segment data. Meanwhile, in like small business, they're barely deploying two-factor authentication or buying, if they're a Microsoft shop, they're buying the minimum what they can buy from Microsoft, and not even any of the security products that they can get. So until we address that other half, we might have a cool nirvana someday, in corporate enterprise, but the 99% of everybody else out there, they don't know how to secure Salesforce and the cloud or buy a secure cloud or anything like that. And we keep throwing new stuff at them so fast that they're not keeping up. So we've got a big problem here.
Yeah, or to be optimistic, an opportunity, to improve. So as we're just getting ready to kind of wrap up this great conversation, Ron, let me ask you, how does all this get funded? You know, I mean, you're in venture capitalists, you know, in a big way. I mean, how's it going?
So it's interesting, and so coming out of Tenable, first of all, we're self-funded. We're doing some independent seed investments. Tenable, we even invested in Reversing Labs back in the day when they were younger, right? So I've been
Oh,
doing
okay.
seed investing, for a long time. But when we left Tenable, we said let's do Gula Tech Adventures. We're putting our own money, deploying our own money. We've put about $100 million to work, a little bit more now, and whatnot. But we kind of get a seat at the table. We got to go to the White House with a bunch of other cyber VCs, and we've got to play the game, right? There's seed, there's Series A, there's Series B, there's private equity, there's growth. It's getting funded, right? There's more people doing cyber now than ever before, and the attack surface is gotten, even worse. So one of the reasons people talk about, why was Tenable successful? So, well, in the beginning, we were scanning computers that were on networks, but by the time we were done, we were auditing Salesforce, auditing phones, auditing virtualization. Well, since I've left Tenable, we've added AI, right? We're adding, auditing people's social media stuff. We've been adding, just trying to see what your footprint is in the cloud and that sort of thing. So there's plenty of money out there to fund stuff. The question is what do you want to fund? On one hand, everybody wants to fund and create the next Wix, right? The next Tenable, the next CrowdStrike. On the other hand, because cyber is so nuanced, these companies are very niched. Like if you look at something like Dragos, Dragos is a network intrusion detection company for critical infrastructure, power and water, right? I can't use it on my parents' network, right? That sort of thing. If you look at some of these new ways to govern, identity in corporate America, they, just trying to describe them would take 10 or 15 minutes about corporate governance and who gets to do this and who gets to. So it's very, very difficult. So in many ways, it's so complex. Point is, if you have an idea, if you see the problem, you can probably get funded. Just be very clear about what problem you're trying to solve, how you solve it, and what you need to be successful.
Indeed. And how does our audience learn more about what you're doing or get in contact with you, Ron?
So the website's Gula, Gula.tech, TECH. Everything's there. The foundation for the cyber nonprofits, the portfolio of companies that we've invested in and work with, and there's a link to the YouTube video. And again, if anybody's an entrepreneur out there, about half of our videos are on entrepreneurship. How do you communicate to your employees and your customers and license it and do things like that? And I truly believe that everybody's heart's in the right place here in the States, but we need more people in cyber, which is why we have data care. We want to appeal to everybody, but we also need more technical solutions, and we need them to be cheaper, and we need them to be more pervasive throughout. We need more innovation, like Reversing Labs here, going away from malware and threat intelligence to actually making a difference. That's a nuanced thing to somebody, but we need more innovation like that. Otherwise, we're going to keep struggling.
Indeed. Sasha, some final thoughts, and if you can let our audience know how to get in contact with you.
Sure. Yeah. So the Reversing Labs website is reversinglabs.com. Yeah, I would just encourage folks to think about their software supply chain more holistically, maybe than what the industry is currently talking about. Just think about, you hear the phrase, the world runs on open source. Yeah, but your company doesn't. Your company runs on commercial software. I mean, show me one person who for critical, corporate value chains like order to cash, hire to retire, treasury management, even things like unified communication and collaboration, who uses open source versus commercial tools where you have support, extensibility, next version upgrades. Nobody uses that. Your companies run on commercial ERP platforms, commercial software, and it's time that CISOs and others had an actual technical control for how to secure that. So if folks are interested in that, I'd encourage them to take a look at Reversing Labs.
Yeah, and just to build on that, Sasha, I'm very pleased that I'm going to be able to see that you have a torso because you're going to be in Miami. We're hosting a dinner. I'm doing a series of pilots. I've never asked our network, to do anything ever. So we're doing our first little pilot in Miami. We're hosting a dinner of a small group of high-level, thought leaders and talking about the kinds of things that we're discussing today. So can't wait to say hi to you in person on Monday. Sam, we'll leave the last word to you and how our audience can can get in contact with you. And just so you all know, they're going to contact you. So,
Well, first things first, thank you, Gary. Thanks again for the honor of being on this this program today, and with for allowing me to associate with Ron and Sasha and with you. If they want to contact the Space ISAC, they should go to our website, spaceisac, SPACEISAC.org, spaceisac.org. And of course, I'm Samuel at SAMUEL at spaceisac.org. One other thing that I hope we will do, as we take cybersecurity in this country more seriously and as we roll out strategies, we do need a whole of nation cybersecurity research and development strategy. This is what we did with nuclear energy. This is what we did with aerospace technology. It got us to the moon. It gave us preeminence for many years in nuclear energy. It's time for us in cybersecurity, and this includes disinformation, for us to have a whole of nation research and development strategy that includes government, industry, academia, nonprofits, FFRDCs, all hands in the ship's cook, to do something that we have done before. We did this with HIV/AIDS, and look how successful we have been with these strategies, and look how many lives we've saved. It's time for us to take a whole of nation approach to that. There's a lot more I could say, but in the interest of time, let me turn this back over to you, our host, and thank you again for allowing me the opportunity today to speak and to give you my views.
well, to Sam, Ron, and Sasha, on behalf of a grateful digital universe, and for me on a personal basis, thanks so much for who you are, for what you do, and most importantly, why you do it. And to our audience, stay tuned for more from the Cyber Hero Adventures.